in sight. Phone lines are open. Dial 384-2191.
Indeed, they are here this second Friday in the month of October on the 11th, coming to you live here on AM 1450 WDLB in video on Marshfield Media Access. Whether it's their Facebook channel or their homepage, you can find this interview with Marshfield Police Chief Rick Gramza this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
As we're talking to you now, I always say that everybody has the luxury of knowing how everything turned out that we're talking about here coming up this month, because it'll be another month before we talk again. But at the present time here, rather ominous in the weather, quick change around, and I don't know if there's any preparations mindful that you guys make for your knowing that this is going to happen, or in the fact that there could be some slippery conditions in parts of the area from time to time. Do you have any shift changes or people on call or anything?
Not really. I mean, we keep our eyes on the weather year round, but in circumstances like this, I mean, it's no different. And most of us being lifers from Wisconsin, or at least the Midwest, we know that weather can change at a moment's notice. You made it very real to me when you used the word snizzle before. I don't know if I've ever heard that before, and I thought, geez, I've been in Marshfield for 22 years now, and I had a first today, so I'm not sure if you made that up or if that's actually...
You're right along the freezing line there between snow and drizzle, so...
Yeah, no, it was. It's a good word. I might use that. I'll give you credit for it.
All right. I'm sure the residuals will come rolling in soon.
Maybe.
The reporting that goes on, like say, for instance, now as we look ahead toward the winter season, and there may be somebody slide through, and whether it's in a snowbank, and even if I didn't contact another vehicle and there's damage to my vehicle, from your understanding, does the insurance company require there to be an independent report, like the department, of what happened?
Yeah, a lot of it depends on the severity of the damage, if anyone's injured, if it's on private property versus public property. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of times insurance companies want some sort of paperwork or something. Usually if the damage is under $1,000, we don't do a state report, which means it doesn't show up on the individual's driving record. But it's really hard. Well, it's hard to gauge that because, you could, if you need to have a quarter panel painted on your vehicle, that could run you a lot of money, if you have to, if you got in a crash to where you hit a curb and it screwed up your suspension, you need a new tire and rim, and that it adds up fast. So it's a rarity when a crash doesn't result in a state report. Not all of those get reported to us, though. I mean, if it's usually if somebody sees the crash, and a lot of times there'll be a crash, it'll be minor damage. It's really hard. I mean, we're not mechanics. It's hard for us to estimate.
I've often thought about that.
Yeah.
For police, it's hard to know what $1,000 is.
Yeah, we used to have the cheat sheet that when I was on the road that we would keep, and it was, windshield is probably going to run you $200. The fenders, back then it was like probably, $300 for a new fender. A new hood was $400.
But then it was a $500 instead of now it's $1,000, right?
It changed at one point from $500 to $1,000. We used to actually have city reportable accidents and then state reportable accidents, and we did paperwork on all of it. Now for anything that's considered state reportable, they can do a self-report, so they can fill out this report, explain what happened. They can get a copy of our response, our computer-aided dispatch report, which just pretty much validates that we were there, we responded to the crash. But the damage was minor, and they just wanted to turn it in. Or, a lot of times somebody will come down to the station and say, somebody backed into my vehicle, I'm not sure where it happened or when it happened, and we'll give them a self-report. So that way, because a lot of times they don't even know if it happened in the city of Marshfield, they just noticed that they have a dent and some, missing paint on the passenger side of their car, and they haven't been to the passenger side of their car. So it's a challenge. Sometimes they can notice it right away if they're walking out from a grocery store or a department store and see what they perceive to be fresh damage. But it's hard to guess what the damage is. So we'll usually, I mean, there's obvious ones, you know, I mean, you can, and most crashes, I mean, if they happen at street speeds, whether somebody's failing to yield or failing to stop or distracted driving or something, I mean, it's going to cause significant damage, and it's kind of a no-brainer when it comes to how much damage there is. But there are a couple of those head scratchers that a lot of times when in doubt, we just do a report to make sure that our bases are covered.
Talking with Marshfield Police Chief Rick Gramza here as we begin to head into the winter season. What should you report? What don't you report? And when you talk about self-report and dents and things like that, when I was a kid, now I don't know if it's changed, you know, well, you don't want to tattle on yourself, you know, because the insurance company knows that now you've got, even if you had deductible and at some point in time you met that deductible, I don't know if your policy says per accident or like your health insurance where you have 12 months to run that up to 5,000 or whatever, you know, 25, whatever your policy has. So I don't know how. Luckily, I haven't had a lot of experience with my particular insurance company. You know, maybe Flo or Jamie come out and take a look at it for me, but I don't know when to get you involved and why, I guess. If I can self-report, I can do that too, but the more that those appear on my driving record, the more I become a dent magnet to my insurance company going, well, this guy, we can up his premiums. He's always into something.
Yeah, that's where, you know, there's a lot of times where people ask us those questions. Well, should I report this? Well, it's your call. We wouldn't direct you one way or another. We don't know what your history of claims are, and each insurance company has different levels of acceptance or allowance, I guess, as to what they're going to permit before they would raise rates. So, you know, and then you have private property accidents, which really aren't state reportable. You could have a significant damage on private property, but the state doesn't care about those. But if you have somebody that's driving poorly on private property or, you know, intoxicated, then we're talking a whole different thing. But yeah, so I mean, it takes a lot of knowledge and keeping up with that stuff, but it's still an imperfect science when it comes to estimating some of that damage. But in the end, I mean, we respond to them. We make sure that there's no injuries. We make sure that traffic is free flowing as fast as we can when there is a crash. We had a significant one. Thankfully, nobody was seriously injured up on McMillan and Veterans a couple days ago that actually shut down the road for a while. And yeah, I mean, a lot of times then you're not even talking about the damage to the vehicles, but traffic standards that are down and maybe the need to run an intersection off of stop signs instead of, you know, traffic lights and signals, temporarily at least. But yeah, so I mean, there can be a lot more damage other than just the vehicles or to the people. I mean, obviously those are the most important, but it's important to get that intersection or get the traffic moving again as fast as you can and as quickly as you can, so that you know, usually you see other accidents chain react happen as a result of one because somebody's driving pattern is that, and the fact that what people are just accustomed to doing has now changed, even if it's just a little bit, and it kind of throws you.
Why is this guy slamming on the brakes in front of me here? Well, he didn't slam on. He was just slowing down because there was a problem up ahead. And
right.
I'm not used to stopping in the middle of the block.
Right.
Talking with Chief Gramza here, Marshfield PD, about when and why to report, I guess, as we get into fender bender season. You mentioned private property, and I've seen some police blotter reports where people will, right out here at the Target parking lot, hit the light standard, or in the Walmart parking lot. And I'm thinking, well, it didn't pull out in front of you. You know, you either slid into it accidentally, or you just were looking down and there it was, or backed into it or whatever. Right. But it was on your report sheet.
Yeah, there's you know, a lot of those we'll do for, you know, a lot of based on the property damage that was done at, you know, at the crash too. So I mean, there's now that, you know, where Target might have a light standard that's knocked down. Well, that could be, I don't know, $2,000 to put up a new light or to reinforce what was broke, to have the electricians come out and you know, somebody come in with you know, the equipment to be able to do it. I mean, it can be costly. So yeah, on top of the vehicle damage and such, but what makes those situations unique is on private property, there's only a couple of citations we can truly write. We can write reckless driving, we can write drunk driving, and then we can also write hit and run. So if somebody if somebody leaves the scene of an accident and and such, we can cite them for that, for the drunk driving or for the reckless driving.
Well, no,
But
there's a
anything
point
else-
I never thought of, was hit and run on private property. If I hit a pole at the Target parking lot,
Right.
doesn't involve you, but yet the insurance company of Target or the company that there's always another side. Damage
Right.
was incurred on both sides.
Yep. Yeah. So we respond to those obviously, and we'll take any help that business can give us, whether it's video surveillance or eyewitness accounts. But yeah, a lot of time. I mean, that something like that would be a rarity, but it still happens. I mean, we've had it happen up at Perkins. We've had it happen, at any of the busier places. I mean, where somebody comes out and they see either damage or somebody will, we've had it to where somebody will, come too close in a drive-through and hit the sign and twist it or break part of, the sign or the that you would normally order from. And then they'll just leave because they're embarrassed without even thinking that, well, I just caused an accident. I should probably stick around and make sure that.
I'll fix my own, you fix yours, is the way we look at it.
I think
right?
that's, and the embarrassment and the panic probably in that moment. But, we do our best to make sure that there's justice served for those victims that were unknowingly, caught up in that.
Well, you brought something up here about a private lot, which is that if somebody did get dented or scratched or whatever in a lot, there is video of that. At what point does it become worth your time to go ask them for that and spend your minutes, an hour, or whatever investigating that?
Yeah, I'd say it's always worth our time. It's just, how fast are we going to be able to solve it? A lot of this, we push a lot of video out on Facebook and such, and it's not always the best quality video, but oftentimes you don't need great quality. You just need to be able to see that there's a bumper sticker on that car that's unique, or, there's something unique about the vehicle, or maybe the way that they're driving that identifies them as who they are. But, usually if we can, it would be tough if somebody says, well, my vehicle is parked at Walmart because I work there for 12 hours. It'd be tough for us to watch that. So that's where we look for like loss prevention assistance at Walmart to be able to say, hey, can you narrow it down for us and see if you can see any moments where somebody may have damaged that vehicle, whether it was intentionally or unintentionally, and then share that snippet of video with us rather than having us try to look through, 12 hours of video for maybe $500 damage on a vehicle. We still want to get them the justice that they deserve as far as being righted in this thing that they didn't have anything to do with. But we look for the help of those individuals to try to narrow it down for us, because you're right, we don't have copious amounts of time to be able to watch a lot of that video.
Well, the reason I ask is because many years ago, before all of the video cameras and stuff, whether it was a mailbox or something along that line that was in the city, somebody damaged it, so the police come over and, well, can't you get fingerprints off it? And he looks like, you watch too much TV. He says, what is this? It's a mailbox, okay? We're not going to spend all of our resources here of the detective division to worry about your mailbox. And but it's federal property. I mean, I'm giving him my best line here, and he's still like, so I guess what is a waste of time, and what are you interested in pursuing, and how far will you pursue it when people get scratch and dent and things? Yeah, I guess that's just what I'm kind of...
Yeah, I would say nothing is a waste of time to report, and then we can take each case by case. If somebody has, a 1-inch scratch on their vehicle and they think somebody, door dinged them, we're not going to spend a lot of time investigating that. We can document it if they want, but most likely, we'll just make an entry on our computer system and say that this happened at this location. It's nothing criminal. It was accidental, and that's where the challenge is. We invest most of our time into criminal cases, and if we can't say that there's criminal intent behind, this damage, that's when, if you have a crash, that's one thing, and that's for public safety. If you have somebody leaving the scene of an accident, then you're talking about, or leaving the scene of having done damage at a parking lot, private property or not, that's, that's a crime where you're, leaving the scene. But when you're starting to talk accidental damage, incidental, I mean, we don't have the time to be able to invest in that. We'll still come and respond and make a note of it. And to make a note in our computer system is very simple. A lot of times when you call dispatch will filter some of that out and say, well, we'll just make a note of it here that happened, and they'll do it for us, and they won't even send an officer out to look at the 1-inch scratch type of thing.
Can I get verification of that for my claim?
Absolutely, yep. Yeah, if there is going to be a claim, yeah, we can do a print off, and we can say, the victim reports receiving a scratch on their vehicle at 2:30 in the afternoon at Walmart on, July 3rd or whatever. And it'll at least say that you reported that, then it's your word against, the insurance companies at that point, and again, how much damage. I mean, if it's significant damage, like somebody backed into your vehicle and dented in the whole door and you're going to need a new door, I mean, that's different. I mean, we've had people think that they got their car keyed and it was criminal, but they were able to tell us that they were parked up at Walmart. We knew it was a windy day. We pulled up their video as to where they were parked, and we see that a shopping cart actually was being blown by the wind and scratched their vehicle, and the damage that was left on it looked like it was keyed. So we were able to eliminate some, a criminal act in that sense, that it was just an accident, an act of God type of incident. But those are, again, it's hard to necessarily come across those one. But if they can, the more information they can give us, the better. But yeah, it's very easy to get a print off or a copy of that report from our dispatch center or from our own records.
Talking with Marshfield Police Chief Gramza, you can too. 384-2191, 384-2191. We're coming to you on this second Friday in October. You know that if you're listening live, or you may be watching us on video here, channel 989 on your Spectrum Digital tier, or at Marshfield Media Access. And on their Facebook page, look for Marshfield Media Access, and you can see this as well, and revisit it if you want to show your brother-in-law what the chief said. And said, see, I told you that's how it was,
Told you I didn't know what he was talking about.
Get that a lot. Not me, personally, but I mean, this time of the year here, as we're in October, getting into Halloween, I was talking to somebody the other day about young people, and it seems like there isn't as much mischief. Am I wrong? Smashing pumpkins and tearing stuff up and doing mischief. Because, again, this is that time-consuming part on the police department when they tore up my Halloween decorations. Well, let's face it here. It may be a trespass. It may be, you can probably enter some sort of a offense in there somewhere, but for the most part, it's just, damage that's being done. So when do you respond, and what kind of things? It's different when somebody has fireworks and it lands in your garage and blows up your gas can, but to just be reporting people for booms, or in this case here on Halloween, I don't know.
Yeah. I think, it's one of those, people rarely do it, but we always say, report it, just report it, let us know. You never know what piece of the puzzle you may have if there's something bigger going on. We've had individuals that say, well, I had a garden gnome, or a little boy fishing, concrete statue that somebody stole. I'm not going to waste your time with that. I'm not going to worry about it. There's probably no value to it. I'm probably never going to receive it back. And they don't report it. Or we'll hear about it a month or two later. Well, I had some decorative landscaping lights that somebody pulled out of the ground and threw. But I just put them back and I didn't report it and I didn't think anything of it. Well, yeah, I guess in the grand scheme of things, we're not going to probably do an official police report because there's either not significant damage or there is no value to the property that was taken. But we can still document it. But those little pieces of the puzzle could really help us if something bigger is happening that maybe you're not aware of. We could have had somebody's garden shed start on fire. I think they call them a she shed, But yeah, we could have a garden shed start on fire, or maybe for a while on Arnold Street, we had a lot of people having their garbage cans lit on fire. I think we had a rash of those happen for about for sure one summer. I think it might have led into a second summer, and something like that. in and of itself might be very difficult to solve. But we've solved cases such as that based on following the path of destruction from maybe a group of kids or adults who started at one place, maybe pulled some lawn ornaments out of wherever. Then they threw a rock through a window, and then they flattened somebody's tires with a knife, and then all of a sudden they started a shed on fire. And through the process of breaking somebody's window, we find some blood. Well, none of any of the damage aside from the arson of starting that shed on fire was to the point where the crime lab would actually take the evidence and analyze it. But now if we can say, well, this is kind of that from point A to point B, this path of destruction we had by these individuals causing damage or chaos, and we tie it all in together, then that blood we can have tested at the crime lab. If it comes back to somebody or if we identify them, then there's a chance that we could solve all of those. So even those littlest pieces of the puzzle that you may not even recognize you have, we often say, don't hesitate to call us and let us know, because we could have somebody have their purse stolen out of their vehicle, say at Arlington and Oak, and then we could have somebody, have some other property stolen out of their vehicle at 17th and Balboa. Well, we can't necessarily tie those two together, but if all of a sudden we see two or three other things, mischievous things that happened between those two locations, and it might be nothing significant, but if we can then tie those together, then once we hold one accountable to one, there's a good chance that we can hold them accountable to the other one as well. So I think those little pieces of that puzzle that could help us in other crimes that somebody might not know were committed or that we're investigating, it could definitely be, that last thing that we need to prove the case or to tie them together.
The hardest part is the time that it takes, because as a citizen you're wondering if there's anything being done about it, and the other thing is if you're going to have your property reimbursed, so to speak. I don't necessarily need the money for that skeleton out front, but I sure would like to have it back. If you didn't smash the daylights out of it, I would like, or my purse or whatever taken. I sit back and I wonder, are they on this thing, or are they, is it just a minor thing, so they've shoved it off to anything that comes in is above what I've got going on? Because you just talked about crime lab, which kind of opened my eyes. I thought, on a rock through a window with blood, aren't they kind of busy for that kind of mischief?
And they would be if we couldn't tie the arson into it. Once you have an arson and have a felony, and it's a felony investigation, then they'll or a part 1 uniform crime rate crime, then they will test it. We didn't necessarily collect the blood at the scene of the arson, but based on the totality of all of the crimes that happened between point A and point B, and we're connecting the rock through the window or the fist through the window with the arson, because all of these things happened within a 6-block area on the same night within 2 hours of each other. The odds of there being 5 different groups or 3 different groups going out and causing all of this is probably pretty slim. The odds of people starting at point A, maybe leaving a tavern or leaving a party and getting to point B, and everything that happens in between there, it could be tied together. It might not be, but it could be. But if those are some of the things, some of the areas that we try to work with the crime lab on, saying we think that this is all a string of events that are related to one another, and we have an arson or we have a felony in there, because a lot of times without that felony, the crime lab doesn't have the time to investigate that. But you brought up a good point with notifications as far as status on an investigation, where things are at. We do our best to keep victims appraised of where the investigation is and where what our next steps are. But obviously that's not our only investigation that we're handling at that time. Most of our detectives have 20 to 40 cases that they're actively working at any one time. So we always encourage our victims of those cases to reach out to us as much as they can. Obviously not daily, but as much as they desire to get a status update if they haven't heard from us in a while.
Well, I don't mean to be pestering you about it, but I do.
But it isn't, and I think, that's kind of that area where people think that they're pestering us because their garden gnome or their globe is missing or was broke. And it's not. I mean, it's our job, and you're not pestering us by checking up on a case to see, hey, do you have any more leads? Do you have any more information? Or to maybe share some information that you remember that wasn't initially shared, or you don't know if you initially shared it because you were kind of under stress at the time. You're never putting us out. You're never bothering us. You're A, holding us accountable, which is very good, but then B, you're just, as a victim, you have victim rights as well, and part of that is being kept in the know as to how your case is progressing, and we want nothing more than to keep you comfortable with the work level and our work product that we're doing. It's just a matter of finding that time to communicate. And a lot of times our officers or our investigators will say, how often would you like an update? I can give you an update whenever I have new information, or I can give you an update every week, whether or not I have new information, or I can just wait for you to call me if you have any questions. And usually they'll just say, well, I'll just call you if anything comes up or if I have any questions.
Talking with Marshfield Police Chief Rick Gramza. You can too here this second Friday in October. 384-2191 live on AM 1450 WDLB. You may be watching us on video here from Spectrum Channel 989 or at Marshfield Media Access on their Facebook page or their homepage. And we started out talking about, mischief and vandalism through Halloween, but you brought up the crime lab, and how backlogged are they? I mean, I don't know that I guess they prioritize. I mean, you'd have to. You can't have every blood sample that ever was being tested at the same rate, but right. I presume you'd go to Wausau, or does it...
It all depends. It all depends on what the evidence is. Wausau Crime Lab, we'll send drugs to, we'll send fingerprint evidence to, we'll send, I think they have a handwriting specialist there, so if we think something was forged, we can send it up there. If we have photograph or video evidence, we can send it to Wausau Crime Lab. The main things that... the only things that we really wouldn't send to Wausau Crime Lab is DNA, which we send to Madison. Arson, remnants or evidence, which we would send to either Madison or Milwaukee, or firearms, like evaluations, if we needed a firearms expert, and that would have to be sent to Milwaukee. Other than firearms and the arson and the DNA, everything else can be sent to Wausau. So it all depends on where, and then depending on their backlog, if Wausau is very backlogged, they could send the evidence to Madison for them to work on, or to Milwaukee for them to work on. But how long is the backlog? It kind of depends. I mean, we've had fingerprint evidence. Most recently, we've had some fingerprint evidence come back after about 14 to 16 months. There's been times where we've had fingerprint evidence come back 3 or 4 years later. So, I mean, they were backlogged for 3 or 4 years. DNA evidence is usually about 6 months, but we've had it as long as 2 years, depending on, how fast they can get to it and turn it around. Obviously, there's certain crimes that take precedence. If you have a homicide, that's going to take precedence, and you might be able to get DNA back in a homicide case probably within 2 to 4 weeks, I would say, would be average. But otherwise, I wouldn't expect DNA evidence back any sooner than probably 6 to 12 months.
Well, that seems like an inordinate amount of time for a hold on a prisoner. At that time, they're going to have to be out, I would imagine, legally.
It all depends on what you have. I mean, you could have a confession case, or you could have, that DNA might just be one piece of, evidence. You have somebody on video robbing a grocery store or a gas station, and you see that they, maybe they're bleeding from something, and they, drip blood as they leave, or they touch something, and we, swabbed it for DNA and for fingerprints, and we've collected that. Well, we still have other forms of evidence, so the fingerprint evidence that they may have left might, take a year to get back. That DNA might take, say 4 to 8 weeks, maybe the blood drips. But if we still know it was them, based on, maybe we stopped them on a traffic stop or on a pursuit and they crashed after they fled the scene and we were close responding. we'd have them in custody right then. We might only have them for fleeing, but they're a suspect in this robbery, and we have, maybe if they're masked or not, there might be certain things that we might say, okay, they have the same clothes, so the clothes that we have on this video is enough to hold them as, for probable cause to believe, but we'd still want the DNA evidence back, and we'd still want the fingerprint evidence back, because could somebody have put on their clothes from when they left to when they got in this vehicle pursuit, or could, there's all these defenses that somebody could have that would put maybe a little bit of doubt in a jury's mind, but yet if you have their DNA inside of the store, if you have their fingerprints inside of the store, obviously. So, it is pressing to get the results of that, but it might, and it might make or break the case, but it won't be necessarily enough to not hold them based on the other evidence, or maybe this, circumstantial evidence, or a confession that maybe they offered.
I think I understand. I've always been confused about why it takes so long to get from initial appearance to actual trial. And you're talking 14, 18 months here with evidence sometimes. Mm-hmm. I always thought that in this country it was a right to a speedy trial, but...
Yeah, it is. It's definitely, and I think that's still the goal. Very few cases go to trial these days. I think, if I had to guess, we've probably had, for a city, we've probably had maybe 5 to 10 jury trials that were at circuit court this year, and that's for our whole department. And I know that because oftentimes we're sending more than one officer down for these. More frequently, what happens is a case will get pled down to something, lesser, in an effort to save taxpayer money and expedite this trial, but then ultimately work out a deal with the individual. If this is, if the individual is maybe a drug addict and they were desperate and this is their first crime they committed against another person, maybe this armed robbery would be dropped down to a recklessly endangering safety, which might change the person from going to prison for 15 years to maybe going to prison for 2 years, or going to county jail for a year and having 5 years of probation, or something like that, because they are a first-time offender or something. So there's a lot of wheeling and dealing that often happens between the defense attorneys and the prosecutor's office. And sometimes when it's so significant, or when a deal can't be reached, is when you see them going to trial. But oftentimes there are some delays because they can't really schedule the trial, like you said, unless we have all of the evidence back and the case is all, gift wrapped pretty much for the DA's office.
Well, as someone who is unfortunately in that jury duty loop, thank God that most of them don't go through. Right. You're on for Thursday and then you call in the morning, no, they pled out yesterday or something.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate thing too, is oftentimes it's always that at the 11th hour when that decision or deal is reached, even though it was put on the table and left for consideration maybe months prior, it's usually that at that 11th hour when a decision is made. But you see that all the time too. You'll see in the news if somebody's on death row, there's all these appeals that always happen in that last, I think, 48 hours where somebody is, isn't put to death, or something is changed, and a judge makes an order one way or another. But there's often it's a very last minute, I guess, profession with when it comes to prosecuting cases like that.
Talking with Marshfield Police Chief Rick Gramza this second Friday in October here live on AM 1450 WDLB, coming to you on video at Marshfield Media Access, whether it's on Channel 989 in your Spectrum Digital tier or on their website or Facebook page. You can talk with us here, 384-2191, 384-2191 on our program today. We'll be back with more in just a moment, so don't go away. WDLB's Inside program for a Friday in October, second Friday of the month, talking with Marshfield Police Chief Rick Gramza. He avails himself to your questions too here, 384-2191, 384-2191, just kind of going through some of the stuff that's timely here in the fall. We talked about winter driving on the way. Don't like to think about that, but it's a reality if you live in this part of the country. We talked about Halloween. Is there a curfew? And what is it for youth in the city?
we always say nothing good happens after midnight. There's certain times when that's obviously, once it starts getting dark, is kind of when we encourage kids to go home. But our curfew is a little confusing. It all depends on your age. I think 12 and under has a certain curfew. 13 to 16 has a curfew. 17 and older, and then 18. So where the cutoff is and then it's different for each weeknight versus weekend. So I think those under 12 is 9:30 on weeknights and 10 o'clock on weekends. I think when you get into that 13 to 16-year-old range, it's 10 o'clock on weeknights and midnight on weekends. And then for those that are 17, I believe it's midnight, Monday through Friday, but I'd have to double check that. So when it comes to trick-or-treating and kids out, or just even out during the summer months, we try to, we don't write many curfew tickets unless we're having kids that are out causing problems. If we had some individuals out vandalizing or just causing mischief and, dumping over garbage cans or, not causing damage, but just causing a mess, if they're going through the park, we might write a curfew ticket on that. We would leave that up to the officers to use their discretion on. But, oftentimes it's if we apprehend or catch kids who are out after curfew, depending on how close it is or how far they are away from home, the options are, send them home, give them a ride home, or just hold them in place and, to an extent, inconvenience the parents, but have the parents come and get them based on where we are. Because ultimately, it's on the parents to make sure that their kids are home within a curfew and that they're knowledgeable of those curfews too, because we can't alone, parent, and if so often we'll call the parents to come pick the kids up depending on where we're at and what they're doing.
Well, I get the impression that it would be not a primary but a tertiary offense, so to speak. You wouldn't chase kids around for being out late, but if
Right.
they happened to do something, it might be an
Right.
ordinance violation that could be held against them if they were
Yeah. We'd
doing things that were...
that's one way that we would, back in the cruising days when Central Avenue and people used to cruise a lot, it would pretty much get shut down after midnight because they knew that if they're out cruising after midnight and they're under the age of 18, that chances are they're going to get a curfew ticket. So that was one way to, I guess clean the streets, so to speak. We didn't mind the cruising as long as they behaved and weren't squealing their tires and weren't racing and doing the things that I'm sure that you're still suspect of from years ago.
That was the point.
Yeah, this is boring otherwise.
We went
right?
from one end of Central Avenue to the other without taking it out of first gear. And just wrap it up as hard as we could.
Yeah, and we have good memories too of that because there was times where, we'll often trade war stories or stories, and it's like, I remember that one time where I made 3 traffic stops and I never turned my lights off because as soon as I was ready to clear from one traffic stop, somebody came by and did something dumb in front of me. So never shut the lights off, and we'd make 3 traffic stops, or we'd pull over somebody and you'd have 5 cars pull over because they knew that they did something wrong. They just didn't know that they got caught, and we'd be like, I'll be right back with you. We'll be right back with you. And then you kind of start at the front car and then work your way back. And, usually then if we would ask, well, do you know why I stopped you? And they'd be like, yeah. And then they'd say it and we don't know why they pulled over. So, so oftentimes those received a warning, but no, it's fun. I'm not saying it's fun in the sense that we like stopping people and causing them stress, but there's a lot of good interactions that can happen out of a traffic stop. People do stupid things. I do stupid things. You do, it's human nature. And if we can just help them learn to be safer, it doesn't have to come with a ticket. It often can come with a warning. It's all about educating them and educating them sometimes through enforcement. The end result of that enforcement is often based on the severity of the crime or the severity of the offense, whether somebody got hurt, whether somebody is receptive to our education or not. So, it all depends. But, we enjoy opportunities to interact with people. And it doesn't have to be a negative and a stressor and everything. It can be a positive at the end. And that's our goal, is that we leave amicably and that lessons were learned from our interaction.
Do you like having interactions on your shift, or would you rather go peaceful for a whole 12 hours? I mean, peaceful in the sense that, you didn't hardly meet anybody or do anything. It's been a pretty quiet shift.
Yeah, there's always things. I was actually, before I don't know if I can even pull it up right now, but before we started the show, I follow this website called Police One, and they had an article out there called 7 Tactics to Keep Police Alert on Third Shift, and it was kind of talking about the different things that people can do, and it says, there's just 7 different titles that they gave officers. One was the hunter, which more or less says convince yourself that there's a serial murderer in town, and you're trying to, find out, you're being very thorough in your observations of everyone and everything around there. Be a fixer. It says, don't be afraid to stop, vehicles for equipment violations, and at the very least, you're educating them or letting them know that their license plate lamps are out or their taillights out or that they have a headlight out. But ultimately, Timothy McVeigh was initially caught because he was missing his front license plate on his vehicle. So, I mean, something as minor as that, which is the law in Wisconsin to have your front license plate on, you could stop, maybe you could interact or intervene with somebody big. It talks about the Guardian and make sure that you're getting out on your beat and stopping into every gas station and place that's open after midnight and just checking in, because those are times that are most likely to be victimized. It talks about being a doorman or a doorwoman and going out and, doing the old-fashioned thing and shaking doorknobs and finding some unlocked businesses so that we can lock them up and prevent them from being victimized. A walkman or a walkwoman getting out and checking out the parks. And they said you'd be surprised at what you can really hear when you're out on foot rather than being, in your vehicle with the windows up and such. So just get out and walk around a little bit. Talks about being a meter maid or a meter man and issuing parking tickets. Just different things that can keep an officer awake and alert and in tune with their community. So although there's times when it's very difficult to find something, I think as long as you're always looking for something, whether you find it or not, at least you're doing your job and you're filling your time. I have a friend of mine who works in Door County, and he said during the winter in Sturgeon Bay, he said they sometimes go 4 or 5 days without any calls for service at all. I mean, nobody's calling to talk to an officer for days. We'll never have that. We've never had that. Is obviously slower days to our officers are boring, but it also gives them a chance to catch up on some things if they're behind on maybe a report or some of those check-ins with victims that they've been meaning to do, but they've just been too busy with other things. Days that are very busy too can be stressful. So I mean, obviously something in the middle is good, but there's always things that we can be doing to stay busy. I mean, we have enough businesses and enough of a population in the community to where we can really, there's still things that can happen even if the streets are quiet or the bars are closed down for the night. I mean, we've seen that more bars recently are closing by midnight than, and rarely staying open until 2 or 2:30. And it's just different, but it doesn't mean that our work ends and there's nothing to do.
Do you find paperwork has always been the boon of law enforcement? It seems like either you have to come in early before the end of your shift and do your work when you're out of this vehicle, or you're out there in a parking lot somewhere with the dome light on trying to get ahead of things so that you don't have to have a big backlog. You can get home on time at the end of the shift. With the communication that you have and laptops in the vehicles and all of that, has that added to the problem or has it made it easier?
It kind of depends. I'd say it's made it easier because you don't have to, because you can still be out in the community. What I've recommended to our officers is if we have a problem house or a house that maybe needs our attention, park within view of that house, safely, but don't park right in front of it. Park within view of that house and do your paperwork there. That way that we have a presence. The community, maybe if there's a house that's suspected of having some drug use or drug dealings going on, the neighbors who have been complaining see our vehicle nearby. We're getting work done with the occasional glance up at the house to see if there's any activity. And just our presence alone might be a deterrent for somebody who's going there to maybe do something illegal or buy some drugs, to not, because we're sitting on the house. Well, we're in the vicinity of the house, but we're not necessarily sitting on the house. So, I mean, in those instances, I mean, having a computer in our squad or being able to do some of that is helpful. In the days when we used to handwrite tickets, I mean, we would do the same thing. We would just handwrite our ticket in the front seat of the squad as opposed to typing out the information on the computer. But being able to stay in the vehicle and stay, out in the community is obviously, a benefit to the community and to us, because if we're different than the fire department and the, EMS. I mean, they don't patrol, we patrol. They almost always respond to emergencies from either the fire station or from the hospital because they just brought somebody up there. So our goal is to be able to respond from anywhere in the city, because we are anywhere in the city. There was all this discussion about our police department and maybe relocating if we built new, if we didn't, renovate our existing, and the railroad tracks and how that gets to be, an obstacle for us. And the goal would be, if there is ever a crisis, I'm concerned, but I'm not as concerned about a train derailment based on the infrequency that they occur. If a train derailed, I mean, it would take out probably most of the community. And, so I mean, if we were next to the tracks or within a quarter mile or a half mile of the tracks, we'd probably have to evacuate. I'd be more concerned about us being on the north side of the tracks and on the south side of the tracks. And although we have viaducts, I mean, at any one time, we should have officers either on the north or south side, unless it's like at shift change. But ideally, then, when we can do a lot of that work from inside of our vehicle, I mean, we look at our squads as kind of mobile offices, because there's really nothing that the officer can't do in that vehicle that they would need to do at
the desk
inside the desk, or at the desk inside the station. So
that has changed a little bit. Then
it has, and that's our goal, is that to limit, not saying that there's not reasons to be in the station, but they can check their email from their squad, they can dictate reports from their squad, they can, they can't necessarily sign off on reports that the secretaries may have transcribed, but that'll probably be coming at some point too, where they just, electronically, sign reports that they've proofread. But no, it's our goal. And I mean, there's times where you have to, obviously you can't use a restroom inside the squad. So I mean, there's times where you have to get out and stuff. But
and you talked about reasons to interact,
absolutely,
and get out.
So yeah, there's a lot of reasons to get out, but there's a lot of reasons to stay in the squad and stay mobile throughout the community as well.
Just a question of point: does the laptop that's in each vehicle go with the officer? Do they put theirs in each time, or is that assigned to the vehicle?
That stays in the vehicle, and they just log in under their own credentials. So all of the laptops are set up the same.
They're community property, and
they are, yeah. They're each assigned. All the equipment they carry on them is their own, to include their radio and their taser and their body camera. They each have their own docking station for their body camera. Each have their own charging, station for their radio. But ultimately, yeah, everything that's in the squad stays in the squad. They'll bring in like a duty bag that might have some, some things that they feel that they need, on a daily basis. Each one's duty bag is a little bit different, but aside from that, I mean, all of the squads are identical. And we do that just so that if you're placed in a different squad for a shift assignment, that you don't have to get to know the squad, and I mean, in a moment of crisis or emergency, that everything is where it should be, because every squad is the same.
You got your ho-hos and your ding-dongs in there too.
Oh yeah. Little Debbie's, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Before we get away here, we're just a few moments left. For those of you who are watching us, this is probably already played out, but this being the Friday the 10th, or Friday the 11th, on Thursday the 10th, I had the people in here for the Get Fired Up for Safety event, and because of the inclement weather that's forecast here, that they have moved it back a week. I just want to add that into the program here today. For all of you that are listening, you can spread that word for us, that has been moved back a week, and provided that isn't just as bad, they'll have the event, but rather than having people stand out in the rain and the snow, they're going to move it back a week here. And that is a big event for the community as well here, because there's the parade that comes up Central Avenue of all the apparatus, and then you got to be careful on Central Avenue, people walking back and forth there, kind of a midway, if you will, of activity between what would be Pioneer Bank and Culver's on that side of the street, and the former Office Max and Arby's on the other side of the street. There's a lot of kids and people walking around. So
it's very busy. So yeah, hopefully next week the weather's better and the event goes on.
All right. Thank you for coming in once again and availing yourself to us here on AM 1450 WDLB's Inside Program with Marshfield Police Chief Rick Gramza this second Friday in October.